Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking closely at Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Yeah, specifically their proposed comprehensive plan. We got a draft, plus some meeting minutes from a listener.
Right. And our mission really is to understand the core arguments, what's actually being debated here.
Exactly. And we also have this memo from, I think, 17 Ann Arbor residents from a planning commission meeting back in May.
Yeah. And the central thing seems to be this fundamental disagreement over the data, the assumptions being used.
That's it. Residents are asking some pretty serious questions about, the methodology, the accuracy, even the community input behind this whole vision.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics. First up, population growth. The plan's numbers are big.
They're projecting, what, an increase of 63,000 to maybe 112,000 new residents by 2050?
Which could mean doubling the city's population or even more. But the residents in their memo, they flag that the plan doesn't actually say how they got those numbers.
Right, no disclosed methodology. And they contrast it with SEMCOG, that's the regional council.
What does SEMCOG say?
Well, their projection is way more modest. They see the population hitting about 135,800 by 2050. That's only like a 9.6% increase from 2020.
Wow. Okay. So plan says maybe double. SEMCOG says less than 10% growth.
Exactly. And get this, recent SEMCOG data, like up to mid-2024, actually shows a decline, a small one, 1.5%.
Decline?
Yeah. And the 2023 census estimate apparently showed a 3.6% drop over 3 years. So the trend, not matching the plan.
That's a pretty stark difference. And residents also pointed out, didn't they, that the city's own transportation plan uses the SEMCOG data.
They did, the Vision Zero plan. So an inconsistency right there within the city's planning documents.
Okay, so shaky population numbers. What about jobs? That's usually linked.
Yep, similar story. The plan expects 30,000 to 50,000 new jobs by 2050. Again, big numbers.
But without laying out how, like what's the economic strategy?
Apparently not clearly stated. And SEMCOG. They project closer to 18,700 new jobs. Still growth, but, less than half the plan's high end.
And what's happening on the ground now?
Well, recent data showed a tiny dip, actually, 0.4% decrease in non-farm jobs locally year over year. And the university, a huge employer, is facing potential funding issues, maybe even a hiring pause.
So the optimism in the plan doesn't quite match the current reality or the regional forecast.
Seems that way. And this pattern, you guessed it, continues with housing.
Let me guess. Plan says build a lot, regional data says maybe not so much?
You got it. The plan estimates needing 30,000 to 45,000 new housing units.
Okay, and SEMCOG?
They project a need for about 4,700 new households by 2050. Households, not units, but still, it's a 9.4% increase, a vastly different scale.
Orders of magnitude different. Residents also mentioned issues with counting existing housing.
Yeah, they argue the plan isn't accurately accounting for housing already in the pipeline or even stuff the university plans to build.
So the housing need itself is under question, which brings us to infrastructure.
Right. If you build all that, you need roads, water, sewer. The plan apparently mentions investments, but vaguely.
No price tag, no funding plan.
It's not detailed, according to the memo. The residents did their own rough math, estimating it could cost like $81,000 to $113,000 per new unit.
Whoa. And multiply that by 30,000 or 45,000 units.
We're looking at a potential funding gap in the billions, maybe $2.4 billion to over $5 billion by 2050, just hanging out there.
That's a massive potential liability.
Yeah.
And what about affordability? Does the plan address how more housing helps?
It seems to assume that increasing market rate supply will automatically improve affordability.
But residents push back on that.
They do. They cite research suggesting income growth is actually a bigger factor in prices. And they worry about displacement, moderate income folks being pushed out by speculation or rising costs from all this infrastructure.
And is the city hitting its affordable housing targets now?
The memo suggests they're way behind on creating deed-restricted affordable units. So the plan's reliance on market rate trickle down. It's being questioned.
Okay, so we have questions about data, costs, affordability. What about consistency with other goals, like climate?
Another point raised. All that potential growth could mean more driving, conflicting with transit plans. And the sheer amount of construction, the embodied carbon, could clash with the A20 climate plan.
So the argument is the plan might undermine its own stated values, sustainability, equity, affordability, because of these internal conflicts and potential burdens.
Pretty much. They also bring up legal stuff, whether the plan meets the Michigan Planning Enabling Act requirements, especially on housing variety, and APA guidelines on planning standards, data use.
And community engagement. How do residents feel about that?
They felt it was minimal, lacking transparency, especially on big things like zoning changes, questions about surveys, who was reached, a feeling that many people just weren't aware.
Hmm. And there was even a mention of potential conflicts of interest on the Planning Commission.
Yeah, concerns about the chair's background in real estate development and whether the commission truly represents diverse community segments as required.
Okay, so pulling this all together, this deep dive really shows a city grappling with its future,
Right.
based on fundamentally different interpretations of data and what's feasible.
Absolutely. The core questions are these massive growth projections realistic? Can the infrastructure actually be built and paid for? And will this approach genuinely make Ann Arbor more affordable and sustainable?
The concerns raised by these residents really highlight how crucial it is for any city's planning process to be, well, grounded in solid data, transparent, and genuinely shaped by the community.
Oh, critical.
So it leaves us thinking, and maybe leaves you thinking too, what role should local data play versus regional forecasts? How can communities make sure these huge plans truly reflect their needs and values, not just projections on a page? It's a conversation that definitely goes beyond just Ann Arbor.